Hey there, listeners. This is Mac Christian here with the National Land Realty Podcast. And got a request for you, and that is to like, follow, and review this podcast. Your reviews are going to help us reach more people who are seeking information about their land. We want to provide as much value as possible for our listeners, and you're a part of that. I'm also going to be reading our reviews in future episodes, so your review just might be a star on our show. Now, thank you again for your time. Listening to shows like ours takes time, and we appreciate you spending yours with us. Now let's get to it. Welcome to episode number 15 of the National Land Realty Podcast, where we discuss all things land. Our goal here is to inform, educate, and entertain those of you who own land or are interested in the buying and selling of land throughout the United States. My name is Mac Christian, and I am the Chief Marketing Officer here at National Land Realty. I'll be your host for this episode. In this episode, we'll be talking about lake and pond management with David Riedl out of Solitude Lake Management. Solitude Lake Management is a national company and specializes in lake, pond, and fishery management, as well as water testing and restoration, erosion management, and sediment removal. Essentially, if you have questions on stillwater for your property, this company has the answers. David Riedl earned his Bachelor's of Environmental Science in 2009 and has been working in water resource management for the past 13 years. If you want to learn about pond or lake management, he's got the answers. Now, sit back and enjoy the show. So I'm sitting here today with David Riedl of Solitude Lake Management. And David, why don't you just tell me a little bit about how you got into this in the first place, and tell me a little bit about your company and what kind of services you provide.
Yeah, for sure, Mac. Certainly appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and your listeners about lake and pond management today. I've been in the industry for roughly 10 years now. I graduated college in 2009. I had a couple jobs, found my way to Solitude Lake Management, where I've been there for a little over a decade. I worked my way from specialist to manager, and now I'm a technical resource manager for the company, where I help to provide and act as a resource for those that need it, and really help to vet and look at new technologies and innovations for this industry. So, talking about what we do is something I enjoy doing, and talking to clients is a passion of mine. So certainly appreciate you having me on.
Yeah. So lakes and ponds and the management of water resources is a fairly niche thing. How do you get into that?
Yeah. So I graduated, with environmental science. So, I bounced around from different jobs, and I always had an interest in being outdoors and working in or playing in and or around water. I also have a strong inclination for problem solving. And I think that's a great skill to have in this industry, because every pond and lake acts a little bit different. So, what works in one pond is not necessarily going to work in another that might be right next to it. So every little pond is its own little problem, and it's a fun occupation to have, I think.
Oh yeah. Well, so and just to be clear, so that the stuff that your team works with is usually if there's an existing body of water on a piece of land, you don't do the construction of that. Do you work with people that have decided to construct an area for a pond?
So that's rare. Usually, when a client comes to us, they're like, "Hey, I've got a lake, I've got a pond. It's overgrown with something. It's unhealthy. I can tell just by the way it looks, but what do I need to do?" And that's when we come in and really take a deep dive, pun intended, I guess, to really find out what's going on. But yeah, we don't actually build or construct ponds. We will provide counsel if a client wants to build a site on their property as to like how to construct it for proper fisheries management. But that is a niche service that we provide. And then, furthermore, in terms of pond repair and functionality, that's also something that we don't really do, but we work with businesses that do provide that as a service as well.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. We come up with listings and property owners once in a while that you'll see, the bulldozers out and, building the wall and then throwing structure down to let a water source fill it. But yeah, you're right. For the most part, people are purchasing something that have an existing pond. So what's sort of the process that you go through? I mean, somebody has a body of water. They want to make sure that it's as healthy as possible. How do you go in and sort of make an assessment on how you would treat existing still water?
Sure. Well, again, we kind of wait for the client to come to us because, there's no way we can, assess things, fully until we get that phone call. But usually what happens is there's been an issue. You've had an algae bloom, your weeds are overgrown, perhaps you've had the unfortunate experience of a fish die off. So you're like, hey, I need to do something to, turn my pond around. And what we do is we come in and typically it's going to start with some kind of water quality assessment to where we're going to grab that water, much like a blood draw at a lab. Like, a doctor can assess you, but they need to understand, and we need to understand what's going on from a deeper chemical analysis. And really what we're looking for is, your nutrient levels. We also want to look for your dissolved oxygen levels. And those are going to be the main drivers of any of the management strategies that we would recommend from there. And then kind of opens the door to all the options that are going to help you achieve, what your goal is, right? Because short-term goal is probably to get control of, the weeds or improve the oxygen, but like, what do you want out of the pond? And then from there, it's kind of fun to play around with some of the management practices that we can do to achieve those goals.
Yeah, and it seems like a lot of your practices are more sort of oriented towards, I want to say sustainability, but it's more natural management as opposed to like a chemical dump, right? Like a lot of what you're doing is more, what can we do that's going to maintain this, for the long haul rather than sort of the immediate fix. Is that right?
Well, I don't want to knock herbicide applications. That is certainly something that we do and do frequently because, look, these herbicides have been registered with the EPA. Anyone that applies an herbicide within our company has been trained, licensed, and then, part of my job is to, assist with that continual training so that we remain, licensed. So, I don't have an issue with herbicides as long as, you're not continually using them, reusing them and reusing them because, you've got algae, you've got weeds. An herbicide treatment is a great way to quickly and efficiently take care of that symptom. But what we try to do is come in and say, all right, what's the source of this symptom? What is the driver of what is causing these infestations? So that's what we really try to focus on. So yeah, we apply herbicides, all the time safely and effectively, and really reduce the chances of any sort of off target issue by being trained and licensed and using appropriately EPA approved herbicides. But really what we do is once we've kind of learned the pond, had that water quality assessment, been out there taking a look at it. And we can provide some more proactive and long-term management solutions.
Gotcha. So when you're looking at that, what it sounds like is with an herbicide or something like that, you go in and you're looking to take the environment as close to zero as you can. So you have a kind of a fresh start to be able to sort of build up and get something to be managed. What do the solutions look like? Obviously dumping, chemicals into a pond or something like that is going to be sort of heavy handed, but sort of these long-term sort of fixes that you guys consult on, between aeration or weed management, sort of what's that process look like?
Well, there's many long-term.
Really pretty broad question. Well, there's a lot.
I've been doing this for about a decade now, and I've seen trends, and really what I've come to learn and what the industry is all about is nutrient management, because that is the ultimate driver of an imbalanced pond. if you've got elevated nutrients, that's like fuel to the fire for your algae and weed growth.
Right.
So yeah, you're going to treat that algae, the algae and weeds, but if you still have that fuel there, something else is going to take its place. So we really want to come in and say, all right, how do we cut off that internal nutrient recycling as well as external nutrient recycling, or inputs, I should say, because if you got a pond, it's kind of like a house on fire, right? And if you're still pouring fuel on it, you're never gonna get control of that fire. You got to cut off that fuel source. So that's really what we try to do is ID, why you have issues and then solve them from there. So, aeration is a great first line of defense in a pond or a lake, because as ponds age, they accumulate sediments, they accumulate muck, they accumulate leaf litter, and all that stuff falls to the bottom of the pond. And that's like your organic matter accumulation buildup. So that's going to keep coming in year after year after year. And the process that your pond does to try to digest and reduce that muck utilizes oxygen. So every pond has a way of naturally absorbing oxygen via atmospheric deposition or wave action, although that's not really a huge input on lakes and ponds. So it's really like your pond only has so much oxygen it can put in, but over time the demand increases. So you have a constant or even lessening supply coupled over the years with an increasing demand, right? So your oxygen levels are going to reduce as the pond ages. So you need to go in there and say, okay, how do I supplement that difference? And that's what we consider, supplemental aeration. And there's many different types of aeration management tools that you can use. A good first line of defense is what we call submerged diffused aeration. Are you familiar with that at all?
I am not.
Okay. Well, that is a cabinet that holds compressors, air compressors that sits on your shore, and then through some sort of self-weighted tubing across the bottom of your pond goes to like a diffuser base that has like 2 or 3 or even 5 discs on them. They're rubber membrane discs, and they've got thousands of holes poked into them, so that you're pumping that air from the surface, injecting it through the tube, and it then goes through the diffuser, and that's going to cause the water to circulate with the help of that air. So it's a very efficient way of circulation and providing circulation to your pond. And you're not actually injecting oxygen into the water. That's a misconception. You're just increasing your pond's natural ability to absorb more oxygen.
Is that because you're disturbing the water underneath and it's able to absorb that way?
Well, it's actually you're disturbing the water at the surface. So you're creating more flow at the surface, but yeah, the bubbles start at the bottom, and then another benefit of the submerged diffused aeration is that it's going to cut off thermal stratification, which happens naturally during the seasons, and then the low cooler water is going to be low in oxygen at the bottom. You see this all the time, and there are ways that we can test for that. And like I said, that accumulated muck on the bottom holds a lot of nutrients, and the lower your oxygen levels at that water sediment interface, the more ability that muck has to release those nutrients. So by putting in submerged aeration and you're oxygenating that entire water column, that's one way to limit or mitigate the release of excess nutrients internally.
Okay. Is it a matter of surface area? Are you just trying to, is the aeration just increasing surface area for absorption of oxygen, or is it, because you're talking about how it doesn't directly inject oxygen into the water? What is the case with that? What enables the absorption?
The movement on the surface of the water. Okay. You're increasing your movement, therefore you're able to absorb more water from the atmosphere into your lake pond. And same is true with floating fountains I'm sure you've seen those. And
yeah, that's what I was. My head was there initially. So when you were talking about the pump system, I hate to draw the parallel because I'm sure you get it before, but it sounds like a tank, right? Where you're just kind of like throwing water in and moving stuff around, or throwing air in and moving stuff around. But yeah, the surface fountains that you see all the time too. I'm guessing that's part of it.
Yeah, that's certainly another way to do it. They're a little less efficient because you're actually physically moving the water, as opposed to allowing air to do it. So, you can move a lot more water with submerged aeration. The only issue with the submerged aeration is that you really want some good depth. So you're talking about at least 8 feet for that. So if you have a more shallower water body, you're going to want to consider, one of those surface or floating fountains or aerators. I kind of group those into 2 different categories, although they float on the surface and they have an electric pump. Some are designed for more aesthetics. So the more aesthetically pleasing, the less water it's going to move. So you put a nozzle on it or some kind of diffuser plate to make it look pretty. You're going to move less water. Whereas your surface aerators, your true surface aerators, are really designed to move as much water and inject as much oxygen as possible, to the effect of I think it's 3 pounds of oxygen per hour per horsepower. So you can really inject a lot of oxygen into your water. And again, that's just one of those proactive management strategies that we try to implement in this industry.
And it sounds like oxygen levels are one of the primary things that you look at as far as when you look at the overall health of the body of water. What are some of the other ones that you look at? And I want to follow up too. I want to ask. Let me double back.
Absolutely.
I don't want to get moving off the topic too fast, just because I'm curious. What does the power supply look for? Sort of these aerators. Is it can you run something like that? Solar driven? Do you have to run hard lines? From a significant power source? What is that sort of what runs those?
Yeah. So with your submerged diffused aeration, there are solar options. They are less powerful than your standard plug-in units, which is typically either 120 or 240. Nothing crazy for those type of units, and there is solar option. The other option with those submerged aeration units is that you can run a very long supply line to like a manifold, so you can put your compressor near the power. Run a very long, I think it's up to 1,000 feet. Depends on the manufacturer.
Oh, wow.
You can run a very long line from where you actually have a power source to where your pond is. And, if it costs a lot of money to run a power drop next to the pond, solar might be a good consideration depending on size and goals. It is a little bit more expensive and does involve a little bit more maintenance, considering you have, a solar panel and backup batteries and stuff like that. So, solar is a good option with submerged aeration. There are some suppliers that do manufacture solar powered floating fountains. I'm not criticizing anyone, but from my experience, I don't think we're 100% there yet. But that option does exist.
Yeah, you hear that a lot with especially solar. Is like the technology is advancing. Yeah. I mean, with the submerged aeration, I 100% think that is a viable option for anyone that doesn't have a close power source or can't run a line, air line from somewhere else. And so, aeration obviously being like a first line of defense or usually something that you look at probably regardless of the body of water. Is aeration just something that you kind of factor in as it's always going to be needed, or?
For the most part, yes. I think there are some circumstances as it relates to, fisheries management where you actually want to maintain that thermal stratification for some cooler water species. But if you're really not that intense in terms of like what you want out of your fisheries goals, then yeah, for the most part, aeration is the way to go.
Okay. Yeah, because I was just something I was thinking about, sort of in prepping for this is especially for a fishery management. Like if you have a fish pond, you've got your trout species, which they like that like 50 to 60 degree water. And after that, you're moving to warm water with, bass or or something like that, where they can tolerate that sort of like 70 degree, and up. How much does location have to do with it? I mean, it'd probably be fairly difficult to do a trout pond in Texas, right?
Yeah, I think that would be pretty difficult. Yeah, I think so. There are some ways to manipulate water temperature here and there, but yeah, you really want to stock some fish that are native to the area, so that you're going to get good growth.
So you're looking at,
if that's your goal.
Not like somebody can, like I said, like move to Texas and be like, I want to catch trout and throw trout in there and have them exist. Even though I have seen them tolerate higher water temperatures, but you're still talking like in the 70s, maybe high 60s.
Yeah, you definitely want to be careful with that for sure.
Okay, so outside of aeration, what are some of the other things that you look at to solve problems?
Well, like I said, nutrient remediation is a management practice that we really try to educate our clients on, because that's the ultimate driver of why a pond is problematic. So the two nutrients that we primarily look at are nitrogen and phosphorus, because those are the limiting nutrients for aquatic algae and aquatic weeds. Primarily phosphorus, but nitrogen is a player as well. The good thing about nitrogen is that, coupled with proper aeration and even some beneficial bacteria, you can really move that nitrogen to a less usable form, or even actually move it out of the system permanently due to the way the nitrogen cycle works. With phosphorus, on the other hand, once that enters your pond, there's really no biological pathway for that to leave. So you either need to bind it with something or physically remove it via like dredging or hydro raking or something like that. So there are certain nutrient mitigating technologies, some flocculants, some polymers, other nutrient mitigating products that you can apply. And I certainly would recommend working with a professional on doing that to dose appropriately so that you don't cause any harm to anything else.
You can say it's probably fairly easy to mess that up if you're trying to DIY this thing.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're probably talking to some people that are more hands-on, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, you can go out and you can, spray a pond if you want. You can go to your local, extension agency or farm supply store and buy a EPA approved algicide. And for the most part, it's okay if you're the owner to go out and spray that. I guess the issue is that if you continually have to spray, or when you're spraying and you see no effect, then you probably need to consult someone to understand from a chemical standpoint, why are these treatments not as effective as they once were or as they should be. So that's what we come in and we're like, okay, look, your phosphorus numbers are off the charts. And, just for reference, we're talking about parts per billion here.
Okay.
It depends regionally where you are, but, somewhere in that 25 to 100 parts per billion range is where you want to be with your phosphorus. And just the other day, I saw a pond in Georgia with a level of over 2,000 parts per billion.
How do you remember that?
Exactly.
A couple of things I'm thinking just from what you've said. So first question is phosphorus entering the system. Is that something that just occurs naturally as sort of biological things break down on the bottom, or is that something that gets entered somehow into the system?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah, both. So, you have, again, like, I'm not anti-fertilizer at all. I'm pro, good fertilizer practices, because you want to establish good grasses and vegetation around your pond so that you don't have big areas of erosion that are filling in even more phosphorus than if you didn't fertilize in the first place. So, there's external sources, and then, and then as those accumulate, then you start to have your own internal recycling of phosphorus. And that's where the aeration comes into play, is that kind of helps to cut that off. And there are other management strategies, like, there's a phosphorus locking technology that's built into like a clay type of medium, to where you can apply that out as a slurry, and it sits over the bottom of your pond and actually will cut off that internal nutrient recycling. And any phosphorus that wants to be released from that sediment is going to get sucked up and bound before it can get pushed into any sort of algae or weed growth.
So this is where you're talking about spraying the pond, and that you're talking about a binding agent that kind of locks up the phosphorus, kind of like throwing a tarp over it, right?
Almost, yeah. I mean, that is a management practice, but it's like a tarp plus, where not only is it a physical barrier, but it's a chemical barrier as well, to where any phosphorus that wants to release is going to get bound up. So, and
it doesn't affect any kind of like biological population, like fish population that could be in the body of water.
Well, that nutrient levels are important for fisheries health and aquatic life. So if your nutrients are imbalanced, you're actually not doing service to the aquatic life, right? Because there's certain the food chain, right? So you have your green algae that get eaten by your smaller fish, and those get eaten by the bigger fish, and they move up the food chain. Well, certain algae that love high phosphorus, blue-green algae is another way, or cyanobacterias, or harmful algal blooms.
I was going to say, these are the ones that you hear about in the news that are giving people rashes.
Yes. Those, yeah. Yep. Those can potentially be toxic and do not generally work their way up the food chain. So you're just sitting that there, causing potential harm, causing large dissolved oxygen swings, which then causes stress on aquatic life too. So I think by not trying to mitigate and adjust your nutrient levels, you're actually doing more harm. Right.
Yeah. Well, I keep on going back to this because you use the analogy right out of the gate. Was you compare it to a fire, right? Where you look at the three things that cause fire, right? You have oxygen, fuel, and heat, and you add those together. You look to take away one of those to stop fire. I think it's really kind of, I want to say, ironic that you're talking about water with the same principle as fire.
Yeah, that's really good. I actually had written down the algae triangle, which is not my term. I stole it from a past colleague of mine, where you need three things for algae to grow. You need your nutrients, you need your sunlight, and you need temperature. Okay, there's only so much you can do about two of those. So that's why we really focus on nutrients.
Gotcha. Okay. So it really is the same principle. You're looking to take away one of the things that causes it. You can't control temperature, probably, I'm guessing. You look to control the other two.
It's hard to.
Yeah. So you brought up the case of this pond that you just had in Georgia with 2,000 parts per billion. How do you approach that? Because I mean, when you're looking to get it down to 100 parts per billion, that seems pretty insurmountable. What do you do?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah, those are certainly like wastewater level numbers. So we don't see it often, but we do see elevated phosphorus numbers all the time, and that is something that we have to deal with. And like I said, what works for one pond doesn't work for the next, and so on. So that's why it's important to get those nutrient levels really understood, so that we can provide the best management strategies that are going to meet the client's goals. So, for a pond like that one I mentioned, it actually was infested with duckweed, and that is a small plant that it looks like a very small lily pad that just floats on the surface and really kind of blocks off that sunlight, so nothing else can grow. And it's just it'll grow. It'll be thick on the surface of your pond, kind of growing on top of each other. And it's easy to control, but hard to maintain control of, because if you still have those nutrients, it's just going to come right back. So we're almost treating that pond weekly and really making no dent, because that phosphorus was so high that the growth rate exceeded our ability to legally apply herbicides to that pond.
Oh,
so yeah, because you have to wait a certain period of time between applications per the label. So in those scenarios, treatments are not the answer. treatments are not always, you're never going to be able to actually treat a pond back to health, right? Because it's short term, it's quick, effective, but you're not really addressing that root cause. So, how do we address the elevated nutrient levels? So, you consider some aeration for the nitrogen levels. You consider some of those phosphorus locking technologies, which there are a handful at this point. I think when I started, there was only one or two. Now there's probably twice that many, or maybe even five now that all have different fits.
Right.
In the industry. So, based on the size of the pond and your phosphorus levels, you can calculate essentially how many pounds of phosphorus you have in a water body, right? Every pound of phosphorus is going to be able to support 500 pounds of algae.
Oh my gosh.
Right. So this pond,
right.
This pond that we're talking about with the 2,000 parts per billion of phosphorus, when we calculated it out based on the volume of the pond, had 22 pounds of phosphorus in the water column.
And you
do the math.
Yeah, that's incredible. So is that the point you brought up something like a hydro rake? Is that where you've got to like just get the bottom of the pond out of there? None of that stuff is in there.
The interesting thing is that this was just phosphorus in the water column. We didn't even do any sediment analysis yet.
Just existing in the water particulates.
Just existing in the water column.
Wow.
Yeah. So we run across this stuff a lot where, they're like, why can't you get control of these things? Well, we have really elevated nutrient levels that we need to address before we can even consider control. What are some of these proactive things we can do to increase the health of your water body as opposed to just spraying your problem away? Right.
Is that a possibility of like just scrapping the pond and restarting and refilling it?
Yeah, possibly. But here's the thing: is like when you're talking about inputs, like where's that water coming from? So that pond was actually receiving reclaimed water from, I think, a wastewater facility. Hence why the nutrient levels. So even if you drain it and refill it, you're still going to have that high influx. So how do you address not only what's there now, but how do you address what's coming in? And these are the problems that we have to consider when managing, thousands of water bodies on a daily basis. And
yeah, well, and I'm thinking, in the range of agricultural landowners too. Something I hear about often is how cattle affect water columns and sort of the runoff from ranching cattle waste.
Yeah.
What does that do? What you always hear about it, but you don't understand why. What sort of causes a reaction from cattle runoff to sort of create those algae blooms that you see all the time?
Well, you hear about the dead zone in the Gulf, and that is a direct result of, that flushing down through the Mississippi and going into the Gulf, and with the high temperatures and the high nutrients and the high sunlight, like that's just recipe for algae growth. And as that, grows and then eventually maybe dies naturally, the dying effect of microbes eating that matter suck the oxygen out of the water. So that's really what's happening in your pond is you have a super high biological oxygen demand caused by the wastewater of these cattle farms, right? Super high biological oxygen demand. The oxygen just wants to be sucked out of that because you're trying to churn and break down that organic material as fast as possible. So for those scenarios, you really need to consider, some of the surface aerators, definitely. Maybe even some of the newer emerging like oxygen injection technologies. There's a new technology called nanobubbles that we're really looking into, which I find really exciting as kind of like your next phase of oxygenation in ponds, which we can certainly talk about. But back to your question of cattle farming. If you were to own a pond, right, and you have a pond on your property, that would be one of the first things I would do. Would be to understand, walk around my property, understand the watershed, like where all the rain that falls flows into the pond. If you're next to a cattle farm, that needs to be something you need to account for in your management of your pond, because you're going to get a high influx of very high nutrient waters.
I was going to say that is that mostly just thinking my way through the process. It sounds like cattle waste is going to be in manure, which is broken down plant material, and then as soon as it comes out of the cow, it goes through biological breakdown, and if that flushes into the water, that breakdown is taking place in the water, and that reaction takes oxygen to process. And so then instead of taking it out of the air, you're taking it out of the water once it gets into the column.
And that waste also brings in a lot of nutrients, which then further fuels more algae and weed growth. So, if you're
accelerant.
yeah.
Okay. So, if what do you see most often? Is it usually people trying to build a fish population, or is it usually just a pond for enjoyment and they want to clear, or is it even down to duck ponds and stuff like that?
Well, from a company-wide perspective, a vast majority of our clients are like homeowners associations, followed probably by golf courses, and then into kind of your smaller categories of landowners, ranch owners, private property pond owners. So HOAs, homeowner associations, are typically have stormwater ponds on their property that they're responsible for maintaining. Sometimes they're more of a focal point of the community, so you have to manage them appropriately as a pond that's designed to literally capture those nutrients that fuel algae blooms, but also maintain it in a way that's going to be aesthetically pleasing. So that's always a good challenge to have. In terms of golf courses, I mean, you can imagine, their main goal is to keep things green, and in order to do that, what you have to do to, you got to fertilize, you got to do all that. So nutrient mitigation is high for them. Now, when it comes to your private landowners and your ranch owners and landowners, it really depends on their goals. Really, I mean, it's up to them what they want out of the pond. I would say you do see an uptick in wanting a good fishery, and wanting to use that pond as like a swimming hole or something as well. So you do see more like recreational activities as it relates to your landowners.
This sounds a little bit easier than like the golf course or HOA kind of establishments, where from what you described is a lot of what they're using water source for is to capture the things that you're trying to get rid of.
Yeah, it's definitely an educational opportunity there for clients and residents to understand, like, this is a focal point, but the purpose of this pond is to capture runoff from your impervious landscape, making roofs and roads and sidewalks.
Somebody wants water, and it's like, well, do you like algae? Because this is how you get algae.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's a great opportunity to educate clients on that cycle and provide them practices to lower those nutrient levels, either with nutrient mitigating technologies or aeration, so that they can be a little bit more proactive and you don't have to respond to ponds that are 100% covered with algae and weeds, middle of July or at the end of June, and they want it clear for July 4th. So it's really what we're pushing is just to try to be a little bit more proactive.
So when you're looking at a body of water, I wanted to ask you sort of like a two-staged question. Is one is what's the process look like from sort of like, I'm guessing it's sort of like a consultation, strategy, implementation sort of process, but I didn't know sort of like what that testing phase looks like. And then I was going to ask along with that sort of what sort of timeline are you looking at for a typical cycle to get something under management?
So as a service providing company, we really try to get people on recurring maintenance frequencies, so that we as the service provider can see and prevent things before they get out of hand. So a lot of those clients that I spoke about, the HOAs and the golf courses, really like that option because It allows us to go out there, assess the pond, get our eyes on it frequently so that, once we kind of learn the pond, we know it works, we can plan ahead for maybe the next year, or give them recommendations based on, what we've done to help improve outcomes of, what their goals are, just primarily keeping their algae or weeds down and keeping the pond looking good and healthy. In terms of turnaround time, I mean, you're talking about like from the time we do the consultation to the time we're doing like our service, or turnaround time from like how long it takes to maybe learn and understand and improve the pond?
I would say both.
Well, I
was talking about all the things.
Yeah, right. So as quick as possible, really, from a service perspective. Obviously, during the summer, we're a little bit busier. So if you have a pond that you're going to be responsible for maintaining, try to get that set up before spring so that we're not busy, because this is a very cyclical and seasonal industry. So we're much busier now than we will be in 6 months. So that would be my recommendation: is the sooner the better. In terms of how long it really takes to learn and understand a pond, I'd say it's probably like 3 to 4 months.
Okay.
Because every pond is different. I feel like I've said that probably 3 or 4 times already. So learning how a pond reacts to treatments, if indeed we feel like that's the best course of action. If they're not responding to treatments and we're like, okay, maybe we need to adjust how we're doing it, or if it's still not reacting properly, or still it's showing signs of concern, then we need to say, all right, maybe we need to take a deeper dive on this pond on your site, while the other ones are probably okay and don't need as much attention.
Yeah, and I think the clear thing there is to sort of like temper expectations. You're not going to go in and hire somebody and have your pond fixed in the next 2 weeks. It's going to take months and months of sort of trial and error to kind of figure those things out, right?
Yeah, because assuming that you haven't done anything, how many years did it take to get there? So,
point.
If we can turn a pond around in a couple months that's been neglected for, I don't know, decades, I'd say that's a pretty fast turnaround.
Right.
In these times, some might argue that, but I think that's pretty good in my opinion.
And you brought up the seasonality, but you brought it up in terms of when people reach out to you, and probably the busiest time obviously is going to be the summer, because when people don't see problems, they don't think about solving them, and then the problems present themselves in the warmer weather. What are some of the things that you need to look out for, kind of bearing in mind the season?
Yeah, that's a great question. And if I were to, let's just say if I were to have a pond on my property, winter, I think, is a great time to assess your pond for its functionality, because it's going to be cooler. And again, this is all very seasonally, regionally dependent, of course, but there's probably not much growing in your pond during the winter, or at least we don't generally see that. So it's a good time to look at your pond and say, all right, what's the normal pool level? Where does it normally sit? Does it rise a lot when it rains, or does it not? Does it flow constantly, or is it pretty stagnant during rain events? So just understanding how it functions and works is huge in terms of being able to manage properly. I would also, I touched on it before, but really understand the watershed. Look for areas of erosion. Look for livestock areas. Is your pond flushing in from one particular area, or is it all kind of sheet flow from all around? So understanding, the watershed and topography of your land does also play into, how you're going to manage your pond. So take the winter time to really just learn how the pond functions, walk around it. Are there any holes? Or is there any erosion? Is it leaking? Just really get to know the pond from a functional and physical perspective. So that's what I would do.
So when you're testing, it's not just a matter of you walk in and test. It also matters about the timing of the testing. So like, are you experiencing a runoff period? Has there been a recent rain? And trying to like probably get there and test within those variables, right?
Well, I mean, typically when you're talking about like water quality testing, you're going to want to do those in the spring or the summer. Spring, I think, is a good time. Things start to warm up. Maybe your ice starts to melt. There's natural seasonal turnover. So as your pond shifts from winter to spring, that actually the pond is going to mix internally based on water temperatures, and that's a natural occurring phenomenon. And that can potentially bring up some nutrients from the bottom, and even sometimes cause a minor fish kill, which we've seen. We've seen seasonal turnovers cause fish kills. Unfortunately, you're going to also want to look at your pond for like early season weed growth or algae growth. Is it a huge concern? Is it covering like 5% or is it covering 50%? Because that's going to be an indicator of, oh, I've got a lot of nutrients going on, or maybe this is just a normal spring algae bloom just around the perimeter because it's more shallow and we get more sunlight, we get more heat. Look for some submerged vegetation growth as well. There are some certain pond weeds that can grow in cooler temperatures, and that is an indicator that, oh, I've had this stuff growing for years. And if you don't, then that's going to continually add to the organic buildup in the pond, which, as talked about, continues to fuel more nutrients into the pond. So if you do have an aerator or a fountain or something, and maybe you've pulled it for the winter, spring is a good time to fire that up and see if it's running. If it's not running, I'll call a company to come and check it out and fix it. In terms of the fisheries is important to you, that's a good time to assess your fisheries. Electrofishing survey. You heard or seen about those before?
Oh yeah, the shocky.
Yep, exactly.
So
that's a good time to do that in the spring.
Oh, in the spring, yeah. That's usually when you see it with rivers as well. When people go in, it's usually Fish and Game goes in the fish survey and they do the treatment.
Yep. Yeah. So we do that for ponds on a large boat that's set up just for that to assess the health of your fisheries. And common question I get, although I'm not really into the fisheries world as much as others in this company, but we do have fisheries biologists. We do have a fisheries team that does this full time, and one of the common questions we get as it relates to that is what kind of fish do I need to stock? And before we even answer that question, we got to say, well, what's in there now? Like, what's the condition of the fish that you have currently? Because stocking might not be the best choice. We might actually be removing some fish from the system. You're going to say, if you have too many
predatory fish in one system, or if you have the wrong kind of predatory fish in some system, you could end up really out of balance there pretty quick.
Yeah, or you can get a lot of fish that are of the same weight and length, and you might need to cull some of those to allow some of those to get bigger.
Right.
So that's definitely something to do in the springtime, so that once you've done that, the water temperatures are still cool enough to where you can effectively stop.
Okay. And so that, all this to say, when somebody picks up a piece of land or has a piece of land that has a body of water existing in it, there's a lot of steps that you can do to sort of get that body of water to do the things you want it to do. If you want it to hold fish, you can manage it to hold fish. If you want to use it for recreation and swim in it, you can get rid of all those nasty weeds. It just takes some work and usually some expert advice.
Correct. So the goals of what you want from your pond are going to drive the recommendations, the management recommendations that we provide. Absolutely.
So, I wanted to schedule this for the time that we have, and I want to give you an opportunity to plug your company, man. So where's your best clients located? What do you work with best, and how do people get a hold of you?
Mac, I would feel remiss if I didn't at least quickly finish out the rest of the year in terms of what you should look out. And then
let's do that. Yes.
I will plug.
I jumped the gun there. Let's do that.
It's all right. So look, so you know what you found out how your pond works in the winter.
Yeah.
You kind of set up your pond in the spring, get the aeration running. Summer is either going to make it or break it, depending on how much you've done initially.
That's going to show all your problems is the summer, right?
It's going to show all your problems. Yep, it can be a great time or a very bad time. So that's when you might have to actually call a company to come in with some heavy duty application equipment and these herbicides and really know what works best on what type of weed or algae you might have, and then. Just moving forward to fall, it might be a time to kind of assess how the year went and what, recommendations and changes you can make for the following year and to kind of set you up for success.
I was going to say that sounds like a lot of people I know where they use the winter to sort of get into shape. And then, you get swimsuit season shows all your flaws.
Yeah, right. So again, I work for Solitude, been there for 10 years. Really enjoy the problem solving aspect of what this industry brings. Every pond is its own little problem. And I really enjoyed talking with clients and consultants internally and externally on how to solve their own unique problems. So I think at Solitude we do a really good job of doing that. I think we provide an excellent service. We are nationwide, and I'd like to think that our speed, quality of service, and price are very competitive. So I definitely recommend people check out our website, solitudelake.management.com. It's a great website, got a great marketing team. It'll drive you to some solutions in terms of other areas to get information from, like your state extension agency will have a good, I think, resource in terms of where to go for help. And there is a Facebook group, actually. I think it's called Lake and Pond Management Questions. If you search that in Facebook. So, I'm on it. There's a lot of other experts on it as well that will help, field any questions that you might have. Determine if this is something you want to do yourself or if this is something you want to reach out for professional help on.
That's really helpful. There's Facebook groups for everything.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Really, there's some really weird niches in there. So national, you, how many offices do you have?
Oh man, we've got dozens across the United States.
Excellent. So almost anywhere somebody lives, they can probably get a hold of Solitude Lake Management.
Yeah, just go to the website, call the number on the screen. They'll direct you to talk to, for sure.
Excellent. Well, David, I absolutely appreciate your time. You obviously have a wealth of knowledge on the topic, and I can imagine that there's several of you in the organization that can consult people and help them out with their pond management and their water management. So yeah, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate it. And it's an honor that you asked me to be on here. And if there are any questions you get from it, I'm happy to help.
Excellent. We'll put all the links to your company details and provide links to get people some information on the topic.
Great. Thanks for the time.
Yep. Thank you too. This concludes episode number 15 for the National Land Realty Podcast, discussing lake and pond management with Solitude Lake Management's David Riedl. You can learn more about land ownership and the buying and selling of land at nationalland.com. Hey there, listeners. This is Mac Christian again. You thought you were getting away from me. No, I just wanted to throw a little bit of a PS on this podcast. Be sure to follow, and review us on this podcast. It really does help people find us, helps people find our information, and helps us provide value to more people. Also, in that time that you should be working and you're listening to podcasts on your headphones, be sure to check out Land Tour 360 at nationalland.com. Like we've said before, It's really amazing technology. You can see some really cool things on there. Everybody have a great one, and thank you again for listening.